Hello and welcome to Dining with Death. This episode is on my playlist, Dining with the Deceased, where we visit locations that are supposedly haunted. Today I'm coming to you from the ghost town of Amboy, California. There are so many things that supposedly happen out in this area that it's tough to name them all. You can hear the train barreling through the distance. It is very desolate, it is very hot and windy, and it's a little creepy here. I'm Stacy Lee. Let's begin. There are places on this earth that seem so uninhabitable, so deadly, that they appear impossible to live in. But human beings have a way of making the impossible possible. People live in the middle of the water. They live on tiny, towering mountaintops. They live on the sides of sheer cliff walls. And they live where almost nothing else lives, in the desert. If you haven't spent a lot of time in the desert, let me tell you a little about it. It is a beautiful and strange place. Not always classically beautiful, but always strange. You know I'm a very skeptical person, but if there's a place I can get a little spooked, it's the desert. There's just something different about it. It feels dangerous, because it is. It feels lonely, because it is. And it feels mysterious, because it is. If you're in the mountains, you can curl up against a tree or a rock for a feeling of protection. There are places to hide or to watch from, trees and hills to climb for a vantage point. You don't have that in the desert. You are totally and completely exposed. There is nowhere to hide and nowhere to seek shelter. Even if you did find a place to seek shelter, you're not safe there. The sun will kill you long before an animal does. The wind and the heat of the day will make you miserable while it kills you, and the nights will freeze you right to death. Out in the most desolate stretch of highway in California lies the ghost town of Amboy, sitting right on historic Route 66. Route 66 was once a major highway with lots of traffic, but once Interstate 40 opened in 1973, it became almost obsolete. We take this road often from St. George, Utah to Palm Springs, California. We call it the back way. You can get to Palm Springs on the interstate, but the back way is faster, and honestly, I just like how creepy and desolate it is. You don't want to come out here in a car that might give you trouble. That's a bad idea. But if you've got a reliable vehicle, this is a fantastic drive. There's a stretch of road that has, well, in my area, we call them whoops. I don't know what other people call them. I'm kicking myself for not filming them, but it's basically like a little stretch of roller coaster for about a mile. A bump, then a huge dip, a bump, then a huge dip. If you're going fast enough, you'll catch air. Then there's a straight of thousands and thousands of Joshua trees, which I absolutely love. Joshua trees fascinate me, and they also freak me out a little because there's a lot of Native American lore surrounding them. We'll save that for another episode. But yes, as you drive through this desolate place, you cannot help but feel vulnerable. And there's always a bit of relief when you make it to your destination and start seeing people again. Despite the fact that this area is so unforgiving and so uninhabitable, people came and they built and they lived. Amboy was settled in 1858 with a few settlers putting down roots and building a few small structures here. Why? That's a good question. There is absolutely no reason to be here, but hey, people do strange things. In 1883, Louis Kingman created the town with the intention of making it a railway stop. Louis was an engineer for the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad, and he called the town Amboy because his plan was to start here with the letter A, and each stop after that would be named something in alphabetical order. A few more settlers came to the area, and it grew a little bit, a very little bit. But that all changed in 1926. Route 66 was constructed and finished, and suddenly Amboy was booming. The area is so isolated that Amboy acted as an oasis for travelers crossing the desert. It was the only place to stop, and boy, was it a welcome sight. Picture it. It's 1930. You're dressed in wool pants and floor-length dresses, sweltering in the 115-degree heat in your car with no air conditioning, and you come across this place with cold water and gas and little cabins to sleep in the shade. It must have looked like heaven. Roy's Motel and Cafe opened up and it did a banging business. Look at this little place, sitting in the middle of some of the most forbidding land on earth, almost defiantly. These must have been some tough folks to come out here, alone. No services, no community, to live like this. Look at this aerial shot of the tiny town from 1925. That's a different breed of person, the person who wants to live somewhere like this, right? And honestly, that hasn't changed. Desert dwellers of this variety are a unique breed. I mean, hello, look at this creation here. This is relatively new. It wasn't here when I came through about a year ago. I'll just say it has a very interesting silhouette as you're coming up on it. This art piece is called Foreign Body, and it's by sculptor Paloma Varga Weitz. There are other oddities out here in the desert as well, along with rows and rows and rows of mailboxes that go on, which begs the question, where are all the houses connected to those mailboxes? And just how many people are living so far out in the desert that you can't even see the houses? What goes on out there? You know, some kind of spooky questions to ask. Amboy continued to grow during the early 1900s, and by 1940, its population had reached a whole 65 people. The Santa Fe Railroad was running between Kingman, Arizona and Barstow, California, so that brought some traffic, but mainly Amboy was supported by tourism. During the Great Depression and then World War II, tourism really slowed, almost stopped, but Amboy survived. These people out here are definitely survivors, but then, like I said earlier, the opening of Interstate 40 was the nail in the coffin for this little town. Roy's Motel and Cafe remained the only gasoline, food, and lodging stop for many, many miles out here in the Mojave Desert. In 1959, this iconic sign was placed and stands here still today as a reminder of better times gone by. They've turned this front building, which used to be used as a lobby, into kind of a museum. There wasn't anyone there to let us in, so I had to film it from the outside, but look at this beautiful time capsule. There's an old bar back in the back, there's a hi-fi system with records on it, there's an old grand piano, and even a comic book open on this little table. You can see the motel keys hanging on a pegboard in the back and an oil painting of the founders. It's all quite magical. Behind the lobby is a motel that is now locked up. A couple of years back, you could get in there, and artists had created some installations in the rooms. One of them was literally a wall of urine. The artist encouraged people to urinate in a plastic bottle and leave it on a shelf as part of their art installation. Kind of makes me want to die. But apparently there was a fire in the motel, and now it's an insurance hazard. So you have to make an appointment, and they decide whether or not they're going to let you back there. But here, in front of the old motel, are these little cabins. They're adorable and so tiny. This place operates as a hobo camp now. Most of the rooms have a mattress in them for drifters to sleep in, and all around the property are plastic bins full of water bottles to stop people from dying of thirst. People out here take care of each other, and if someone is down on their luck and passing through, they're happy to let them rest up here. I can't imagine that happens much outside of November, December, and January. It's so hot here today in early June that my camera started glitching from the heat. But in the event that someone does pass through, they've got water and shade, which I think is wonderful. This little row of cabins is iconic, and you've most likely seen it in movies and TV shows. There's a lot of filming that takes place out here. Inside the gas station, which has pumps that are so old you have to have the attendant turn them on manually for you, is the site of the old diner. These are the same chairs and the same countertop, and behind lies the same refrigeration units that date all the way back to the 1940s. The gas station sells lots of memorabilia and logo gear, and you know I had to get me a Roy's Motel and Cafe t-shirt. There are snacks and drinks, but honestly, it's the air conditioning for me. Just stepping inside here after being out filming for hours was divine. We call it the death heat. We go back and forth living between St. George, Utah and Las Vegas, and they can both get up to 120 degrees in the city. And that kind of heat, it'll kill you. This is such a cute, kitschy little spot, and off to the side of the gas station, you can see the old Amboy school. I couldn't get in there, it's all locked up, but can you imagine sending your kids to this school? I'm actually shocked it's this big. Were there really enough kids to need a school this big? That seems kind of hard to imagine. This photo is the graduating 8th grade class of 1945, which is said to be the biggest class that ever graduated from the school. There's 15 students in this photo, so again, this school seems very large if this was the biggest graduating class. I found this old photo of the school board from the 1950s, and I'm wondering if the Roy in the photo is the same Roy from Roy's Motel and Cafe. Something tells me it is. But across the street is where everything gets really interesting and really, really spooky. There are several buildings on this little plot of land, and I'm going to take you to each one that is accessible. But between them sits this rock formation that someone has carefully and lovingly created. From a distance, it appears to be a pond with a small waterfall, but that's a preposterous notion in this forsaken place. A pond that small would evaporate in a day in this crushing heat. As you get closer, it appears that it's a little rock garden and a cactus garden with steps that lead to a small platform where something used to sit at the top. Someone spent a lot of time on this little creation, but there's no one to attend to it now. To the left is a church, its steeple topped with an iron cross that sits against the blue sky as a reminder that people used to worship here. I would have loved to take you inside, but it is completely boarded up. It's very apparent that whoever owns this property does not want people inside. Imagine going to church here, walking across this hot, not quite sand, not quite dirt road to get here, going inside to sit in the pews and coming back out into nothing, really. It kind of sends a chill up my spine. It's giving from dusk till dawn vibes, but I still would have loved to go inside just to make sure there weren't any vampires holed up in there. Next to the church sits a little home. The handcrafted pane windows are all broken out, which makes the panes look more like jail bars than windows. The stucco is starting to crumble, but it's in remarkably good condition, considering what it endures day in and day out, standing here in the blistering heat against the desert wind. Every 30 minutes or so, a train barrels by in the distance, blaring its horns to alert the possible travelers that it's coming through the railroad crossing, and the sound is haunting. There is just nothing here, not a tree, not a bird, not even a lizard out this time of day, which makes what happened to me here even more interesting. As I walked around the corner of this little house, movement caught my eye, but by the time I turned my head, all I saw was something black and round on the ground that moved from in front of the corner of the house and disappeared out of view, much like you would see a foot quickly pulling away, as if someone were to run. But of course, I looked and there was no one there, and I didn't hear a thing. It was probably just a piece of black plastic or trash, but I couldn't find anything that looked like what I saw, and I did try to find the item. But the wind was blowing here, as it always does, and a lot of trash does move through this area. As you walk into this little home, the first thing you see is an old lawn chair and one of those plastic bins I mentioned earlier that volunteers have filled with water bottles and soda cans for desperate drifters needing hydration and a place to get out of the sun. The living room is off to the right, and of course, there's a creepy broken chair in the corner. These old floorboards make me think of the hands who laid them and nailed them into place so long ago. I'm surprised there are so many windows because of the intense heat, but they do provide a fantastic view of the trains rolling by. And here's that haunting sound. If I were living out here in isolation, I think the trains would bring me some comfort because they're a reminder that there is life outside of here. Maybe the people who lived here didn't care about that. Maybe they were here because they wanted to leave that life behind. I imagine this little room furnished with a sofa and a couple of chairs, most likely some ashtrays, and later on, maybe even a television. I think about what the people who lived here, long dead, would think about me walking around in their house to post it on an internet they could never even have dreamed would exist. I think about the meals prepared in this kitchen and wonder who chose this bright yellow color to make it feel like a happy place, and what it must have been like to stand at that kitchen sink and wash dishes as the trains flew by, watching your laundry drying on the clotheslines in the backyard. There's a very tiny room off to the left of the entry which must have been a den or a music room. It wasn't a bedroom because down the hallway you can see the bedrooms. There are 3 of them, and here you can see the remnants of a makeshift bed, an old sheet, used by the drifters who made this their temporary home, and of course, some person has to ruin the patina of the old paint with their tagging. As you continue down the hall past the bleached mint green peeling paint, you come to a large bedroom, and again, someone has placed chairs in it so there is somewhere to sit for those needing these abandoned places for shelter. You never know how important a chair is until you don't have one. If you know, you know, right? This room is painted what was probably once a beautiful baby blue, but it's very beautiful now in its own way as it peels and rots and transforms in the desert sun. This room has its own bathroom, which makes sense for the main bedroom in the house. Again, someone has tagged it with this very creepy and dark message. I didn't go too far inside the bathroom because sometimes people in these locations will hide out when they see others coming, and that's usually in a bathroom. I didn't want to startle anyone that might be here, although I didn't really feel anyone around. Even the bathroom has a large window in it with a view of the great, vast nothing behind the house. The broken glass and the sagging ceilings with a single barren light bulb socket made the house seem spooky, but I imagine this was once a very nice, comfortable little home for someone many years ago. It probably felt comforting living next to the church, and I can see why people that live like this would want a church to attend, to meet friends at, to pray for safety, because this place does not really feel safe. You can see the old electrical wire run to power the house, and I'm sure that electricity made this home feel like a palace when it was first installed. Behind the church and the little home sits a small building that is mainly one large room. It feels very much like a school, but as we know, the school is much bigger and across the street. So maybe this was the first school or a community center, maybe even the first church. It's basically just this one room. You can see some old church pews in here. And of course, this old piano, this poor thing, sitting here in pieces and badly out of tune. There's a very cute little wrought iron door that serves as the gateway to the small entrance, and a couple of small rooms in the back. One is a bathroom, and the other was most likely used for storage. So again, this feels like a school or community center, maybe a church. Next to the single-room structure is a very cute little house. It's got a darling little eave, an entryway, and someone even built a little fence around the porch. I'm not sure why you need a fence in a place like this, but people like fences. Fences make good neighbors. It's a bit of a distance from the church, but you can still see it from here, and this one even has some remaining glass in the windows. Someone has been living here very recently. There is an old iron container full of straw to make a fire in, and this gray paint looks very new, like maybe not even a year new. In fact, the paintbrush is still sitting right here in the kitchen. Someone has boarded up the broken glass panes, where in the other houses the broken windows are just shattered on the ground. The place has been swept. Look at this cute little kitchen where I'm sure many meals were prepared and eaten. There's a little spot for a table and chairs to sit and eat at, and you can see where the old floor tiles have been pulled up. There's a small bedroom with an updated ceiling and an old laundry room next to it. And then we saw absolute proof that someone is or has recently been living here. When you see a rope tied around a door handle in a place like this, you know. This is a very simple security/alarm system. When someone goes to sleep in these rooms, they tie the door shut from the inside, securing the rope to a fixture if there is one, and if there isn't, to their foot. That way, if someone tries to pull the door open, they can't, and it also wakes the sleeping person inside so they know they're not alone. We found these on a couple of the doors in this house. There's a water jug in the sink where someone was washing, and there's blue tape in the upper corners of the windows where someone had taped old sheets up for privacy. This shower hasn't worked for a very long time, but look at this maroon and gold bathroom tile, very 1940s. This particular bathroom has had the toilet removed, and I didn't check to see what's in that bag there. I didn't want to know. This little tiny closet, not even big enough to curl up in, has a string tied to the inside of the doorknob and lots of water bottles around inside. So yes, someone's using it, which makes me feel kind of sad. This house too has a fenced yard, some old laundry poles. You can almost see the sheets and the 1950s style dresses and shirts hanging out there blowing in the wind, right? This place even has a little detached garage. It's kind of a spooky little place. It would be a great spot to hide something. And in the back, what I thought was yet another piano turned out to be an old organ. The old organ is barely holding together. It's a shame to see any musical instrument in this condition, but it does serve as a testament to the heat here. Even in the shade, it's falling apart simply because it's so hot. It's been here for a very long time. Not far from here stands the shoe tree. There's a long-standing tradition in many desert towns of the West to leave a shoe or a personal item when you see a shoe tree. The original shoe tree that was here forever got so big and heavy that it fell down in 2010. People do continue to add to it, but someone has constructed this new one. It has shoes and plastic cups and hats and beer bottles and underwear and bras and all kinds of things attached to it. It's just another kooky desert monolith made by the people who pass through and want to leave a part of them behind. It's not difficult to believe that ghost stories grow like weeds out here in this desolate place. One of the most haunted places is said to be the school and the schoolyard. Visitors report hearing playground noises, children playing and laughing and feet running on the ground, but as you can see, there is no playground anymore and definitely no children. In one of the now fenced-off motel rooms before the fire, it is said that blood appears on the wall. A Reddit user claims to have taken this photo on a visit to the ghost town one day and said they didn't see the blood on the walls until they looked through their photos. It does look like blood on the wall, but I also read reports that a movie was filmed here recently. There is a lot of discussion online about how people who occupy these abandoned structures are not actually drifters, but cultists, Satanists, and traffickers. There is a lot of talk about weird energy here and stories about people disappearing into thin air. Some people believe it is much like the Bermuda Triangle, some kind of vortex, and others believe there are killers camouflaged nearby, waiting and watching to take victims. People who have been here for decades, much like the killers in the hills have eyes. There are many stories of people driving down these desolate roads when out of nowhere appear people who look like they need help. When the car pulls over and the people inside stop to see what they can do, they're attacked and killed. People talk about long-haul trucker serial killers who pull into this area for a rest and some fuel and leave with an abducted passenger. And there are a lot of stories about bodies buried in the desert. Of all of them, I find that one the most plausible. You could do just about anything out here and never get caught. There is simply no one to see you. If you don't want to be seen, this is the place to go. There is a story about a hitchhiker who found a severed head wrapped in plastic on the side of the road here, and the owner of that head has never been identified. If you believe the stories on Reddit, this is a prime location for alien abduction. I found so many stories of people claiming to have been standing on the sand one moment and being pulled into the air towards a UFO the next that it actually surprised me. People claim to lose time here, to not know where they've been or what they've been doing for hours. Native Americans believe this is the land of spirits and mythical creatures like skinwalkers and the Wendigo. Many of the Hispanic residents through the years claim to have seen the chupacabra walking amongst the windswept sands at night. As the wind whistles through the broken windows of the long-abandoned houses and the trains roll by in the distance, it is not hard to imagine terrible things happening here. When the sun goes down, the critters come out. A few years back, in 2018, Susan Schmeirer and her husband William stopped here to hike the Amboy crater. 10 days after they stopped here, their abandoned car was found at the trailhead for that crater. William's body was found 3 days later. He had died of heat exhaustion. Susan was missing for almost a year, but finally her body was found at Amboy Crater National Landmark, and it appeared she had ventured out into the desert seeking help. Search teams looked for the couple for weeks in temperatures reaching 160 degrees on the lava fields, but they knew very early on, no one can survive out here. This is unforgiving and brutal territory that cares nothing for human life. The best thing you can do when you come to this area is just keep on driving. Now, on this playlist, we always eat in our haunted location, but there isn't anywhere to eat here, or anywhere close. There are some snacks in the gas station, but that's it. I do want to show you some scenes you might recognize from the movies. California, starring Brad Pitt, David Duchovny, and Juliette Lewis, was filmed in part right here. One of my favorite horror films from the 80s, The Hitcher, was shot here. You can see today's location in many of these famous scenes from that film. A newer horror film called Southbound was shot in this area as well. This memorable scene was shot right where I've taken you today. But the best movie story I have from this area is even better. About 15 years ago, my husband and I left St. George, Utah around 9 p.m. to drive the 6 hours to Palm Springs for a vacation. We closed our restaurant down after service that night and headed out into the desert. Taking the back way at night is an experience. Now, this was before the internet was all over your cell phone. Your cell phone was just used for calling people. You had to have a map, but we knew this road pretty well by then. As we came to what is always a totally desolate turn, a critical turn if you want to get to Palm Springs, we were shocked to see 4 or 5 cars stopped at the stop sign of that turn. You don't see cars out here, especially at 2 in the morning. I got instantly panicked. I thought we were being held up, that someone was taking hostages, and my husband actually started to back the car up and turn around to get us the hell out of there. But just as he did this, we saw the entire night sky light up. Coming down the road towards us was a gigantic horizontal crane covered in the brightest lights I'd ever seen. There was a small army of cars following the crane, and in front of it, a strange-looking truck on a flatbed. There were 2 men fighting on top of that truck, and we knew they were filming a movie. There was a police officer that had stopped traffic, and as we were finally released and allowed to pull forward, we rolled our window and asked, "What's going on?" She said, "It's some movie called Transformers." This was the very first Transformers film that was being shot out here in the middle of the desert. Boy, was it a production. I could not believe what we saw. This desert has been here for millions of years, and it will be here till the end of time on this planet. It serves as home to very few and inspiration for a lot of very spooky stories. It's as old as time itself, and if you believe the legends, so are some of the ghosts who are still here. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, Dining with the Deceased. Like the video if you liked the video, and subscribe to the channel if you want to support me. You can also join my Patreon. That's always appreciated, and it's very helpful. Stay safe and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.